Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsession
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hello and welcome to the Dork Forest. I'm Jackie Cation. You know the websites, JackieCation.com, DorkForest.com, TheDorkForest.com. If you like a determiner, FamilyPetAncestry.com, which I just renewed because it's funny. Let's do the credits. You just heard the song that Mike Rickberg composed and sang with his wife Sarah Cohen. He will sing his words to the Mexican Hat Dance at the end of the program. Patrick Brady's going to fix this audio, and Vilmos does JackieCation.com, the website. DorkForest.com has available essentially player notes and the YouTube version of the show. You can listen to the show on iTunes and Stitcher and all the things, but you can also listen to it on YouTube or on dorkforest.com. JackieCation.com has all my stand-up comedy information and the merch for Dork Forest. You can get t-shirts, you can get CDs, you can get pins that say Spooky Reading Girl or Meat Shield, but they are not available on the website. You have to email me, Jackie@JackieCation.com. There's also the calendar of my stand-up comedy to find out where I'm playing near you. If I'm not playing near you, talk to your local comedy club and request me. What the heck? There are also videos of my stand-up. You can watch my Conan. You can watch clips from my DVD and links to my other podcasts, The Jackie and Laurie Show on Nerdist, which is just about stand-up comedy. Anyway, there is also a donation button on both JackieCation.com and DorkForest.com. It's a PayPal button. All it is a way to donate to support the show. You can do that by using the Amazon banner, which is just a link to get you to Amazon, which supports the show. You just order like normal. It doesn't cost you extra. And you can use the donation button just to donate. If you don't like PayPal, you can Venmo me, Jackie@JackieCation.com. There is also premium episodes at thedorkforest.bandcamp.com, and those cost $2 a piece because they're live episodes and they cost me some money to put up. So if you've run through all the episodes, you can go to Bandcamp and get like 10 more. What the heck? So much info. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Thanks for supporting the show. Let's get into it. Hey, it's Jackie Cation. Welcome to my living room. I am in my living room with a Japanese action figure fan. Is it an action figure, Jason?
Well, they're not action figures because they're not articulated. They're more of a gumball machine toy.
Oh, okay. Wait, did they actually come out of gumballs?
They did. That's the origin of them.
Okay.
But they have transcended that.
Into something taller?
So the format is from the origin of being like a gumball machine toy.
Which means that the arms and legs might move, but they don't articulate and bend and stuff.
No.
Okay.
They don't move at all.
Oh, they don't?
In this case.
In this case. They are just as like tiny statues?
Yes.
Small statues?
And I'll hand you one.
Oh, hand me one. Here we go. And what are they called?
They're called Kinnikuman.
They are called Kinnikuman.
And in America, they were called Muscle.
And muscle is an acronym for?
Millions of unusually small creatures lurking everywhere.
Lurking everywhere.
Yeah, Mattel came up with that.
Well, Mattel is not wrong. They got a laugh. This is a robot. Is it a robot?
You know, that's what's interesting about them, and that's what I love about Kinnikuman, is that in 1985 to like 1989, Mattel released these in America. They adapted them from the existing Japanese toys.
Okay.
You know, the molds existed. And there was a real boom at that time with Transformers and other Japanese toys being able to just be re-released here without having to do any new R&D.
Okay.
But unlike Transformers, which had a cartoon and a comic book.
Right.
In Japan, muscle toys, which are, if you're listening at home, they're little pink wrestlers. They're about an inch tall. They are like an eraser, but not.
Right. They look exactly
like an eraser, and that's because they come out of figural erasers that you would buy in gumball machines in Japan.
Okay.
So they look like an eraser because they're that's their origin. That's what that's the toys used to be erasers, and then they just became statues. So if you're of a certain age, you will remember these little pink wrestlers.
They're like an inch and a half.
And what I love about them.
What do you love about them?
Well, in the 80s, there was a huge boom in toys because Reagan deregulated the ability to advertise, not just advertise toys on television, but have toys based explicitly on a cartoon.
Previously you could not do that?
Previous to Reagan, they were quite concerned that children's programming would just be nothing but an advertisement for toys.
Because it's an excellent idea. It's a great way to sell toys.
Reagan got rid of that prohibition, and that's the introduction of G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, Rainbow Bright. The whole 80s boom of toys is in response to the ability to make a cartoon, make toys based on it,
and then sell those toys.
So in the case of Transformers, the cartoon is based on the existing toys.
Okay.
The toys were part of a trend in the late 70s in Japan for a cassette player that transforms into a robot, a car that transforms into a robot, a tank. They're actually different toy lines.
Okay.
And they were bundled together for America. And then a cartoon was written around the existing toys that had already been elaborately designed.
What? That's crazy. Wait, first of all, let's back up very quickly just to find out that there was a cassette player that then could be unfolded and still play a cassette?
No, it did not work.
Okay.
But one of the toy lines in Japan was household objects. So a camera, a boombox, a cassette player, a gun.
Oh, holy
which
shit.
becomes Megatron for the first couple years.
Megatron was a gun?
Megatron was the main villain in Transformers, and the first generation, 1984 American Transformer Megatron is a pistol, like just a real-looking pistol.
Holy crap!
And in the cartoon, he just transforms into like a small gun that other robots can fire at things.
What? That
so
is crazy,
one of the Japanese toy lines that got incorporated into the American Transformers was a toy line of cassettes that become robots, cassette players that become robots, cameras, binoculars.
It reminds me of? It reminds me of those things where you can hide pot in it, but it looks like a can of Pepsi.
But it's for children.
But it's for children.
And it's Japanese engineering. Yeah.
Right. And it's a camera, so they're like, he looks like a camera, but he's fighting for justice.
Actually sort of a robot.
Super villain. Yeah.
So in Japan, the toys came first, and they were different toy lines. One was the line of household objects.
Okay.
One was like cars.
Okay.
Maybe multiple ones were cars, tanks, that stuff.
Okay.
So those toys were all packaged together into a single toy line, and then the cartoon Transformers was created as a joint Japanese-American production to then resell or sell, in the case of America, these very popular toys.
Right. Holy smokes. Okay, so that's where...
that's about 5 years before we get to this.
Okay.
And it sets up why I like it. So because Transformers was such a huge success, we had G.I. Joe, which again, you have some cases you have the toy design predating the cartoon. He-Man, Masters of the Universe, the toys were designed, and then the cartoon was written based on those toy designs.
Oh, wow.
And in the case of Thundercats, it's explicitly so. They made the toys, and then they wrote a cartoon about the toys. So everything that Jimmy Carter was afraid of happened right away.
Right.
No, whatever all the politicians were worried about for children's programming.
They were correct.
It was correct, but it also was I turned out fine, except for the fact that I still care about this stuff.
Right, exactly. And I watched 12 hours of television a day, and screen time didn't seem to ruin me as a human. So here's
with that history.
Yes, but can I ask quickly, because you probably know, and I don't.
Yes.
What are Thundercats? I never did see the show.
It's a very beautiful line of toys, because the toys were designed first.
Okay.
Which makes it a lot easier than trying to make an action figure of someone's drawing.
Oh, right.
You make a drawing of someone's action figure.
Oh, there you go.
They're a race of cat people. They fight Mumra.
What is Mumra?
He's just like a bad guy.
Oh, he's one bad guy. So cat people, the Thundercats.
Well, he has his crew. You have to sell more figures. So he has henchmen.
He's going to need...
there's more than one vehicle.
Right.
They have a house they live in. It's called the Cat's Lair. So there's a whole line of accessories and toys.
Conveniently, that is lovely. So there are like Power Rangers, or there like 5 main Thundercats?
Yes, but they're not uniform.
They're not named, or
they are named, but they are quite different. So there's Shitara, the female, Liono's the leader, Panthro, Tigra.
Is Panthro a panther looking kind of thing? Okay,
Bengalis.
Fair enough.
So the trend from like 1981 to 1985 was a boom time
of that
for the American and Japanese toy industry. Especially Japan had really pushed the ball forward in terms of the quality of manufacturing. The original Transformers are like deeply engineered metal,
Oh, really?
elaborate
And really awesome
puzzle robot things.
Oh,
Like they're as sophisticated as like a car you would
Yeah.
buy. You know what I mean? They're made out of metal. They're interlocking. They're not cheap.
I would love to see one of those.
They're not shoddy.
Right.
And I wish I had one to hand you right now.
So do I.
But
you do not. They are probably very expensive at this time.
you'd be surprised. Most things are not.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, that's kind of neat.
So after Reagan deregulated Saturday morning cartooning, there was a real boom following really from George Lucas's Star Wars toys, which created the action figure industry.
Okay.
George Lucas had actually kept the rights to the Star Wars merchandise,
right,
by bringing the picture in under budget.
Yeah.
And so the merchandising rights which were worth $1 trillion in retrospect,
right,
but which Fox Pictures considered at the time to be basically worthless because a movie has a limited release period. So merchandise based on a movie is only good for 8 weeks.
Yep.
And so George Lucas couldn't get anyone to even make Star Wars action figures, which is why Kenner, like a 13-person company from Cincinnati that made Mr. Potato Head, got the license. The Mattel and the other big Hasbro, which made G.I. Joe, they all passed on it. And George Lucas made more money from those toys than he ever made from those movies.
From absolutely anything else I can imagine.
So by the time we get to 1985, most of these cartoons are
it's a cash cow.
Might be perfectly good entertainment, but they are 22-minute commercials for the toys.
Yeah.
And in Japan, that's true of Kinnikuman muscle toys.
Okay.
It's based on a very popular manga that has 75 volumes.
Okay.
Which was then into a very popular early 80s anime, which has hundreds of episodes.
Okay.
But none of that was ever brought to America.
Okay.
The only thing we got were these little toys with absolutely no backstory or official explanation of who...
You could read the Kinnikuman manga if you wanted.
If you were Japanese.
Because it's only in Japanese. It has not yet been translated.
In America, in 1985...
Oh, right.
They brought in the toys based on this property, but they did not bring in the cartoon or the comic books or any explanation...
That's weird.
...of who these little characters are.
Yeah.
So for a kid, you got to make up anything you wanted about these very elaborately designed...
Right.
Robot people, wrestling guys.
They're wrestling guys. You keep saying that. What is that? Are they wrestlers?
They are wrestlers. And they were marketed as wrestlers. So on the packaging, they're drawn in a wrestling ring.
Okay.
And that's true in the Japanese source material, but no American would have any way of knowing that.
You just see that, all you get is that image
because
on the packaging.
This is around the same time as Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant.
Right.
And the source material is about a superhero wrestler who if he wants to remain the Prince of Planet Muscle, he has to win a wrestling tournament. And it's a comedy. It's a parody of Ultraman. It's 100% humorous.
Okay.
But we as an American child would have no way of knowing any of that.
No.
What we got are just tons of fun, very creatively drawn, executed little toys.
And a lot of good detail on them,
Beautiful
too.
detail. And
look at this guy's helmet. Or his head. It could be his head.
And so, unlike the every other toy line,
right,
where
the story's written
Lion-O
for
is
you.
Lion-O, he's the leader, he uses the Sword of Omens, he fights Mumra, whatever. These you could make up who was the good guy, who was the bad guy,
right? And
the way they were distributed is in packs of 4 for a retail price of $1. So they were distributed for 25 cents a piece, and or in a package of 10 where you couldn't see who you were getting. So in the 4-pack you could see, but it's completely random.
Right.
The 10-pack you couldn't really see who you were getting.
Right.
And there's 236 different people.
What? You could collect 236 dudes.
Yes.
Little.
And so they were distributed basically randomly, and you had no idea how many existed as a child. You just knew that it seemed limitless because you could buy 30 or 40 random ones and get one double.
Right.
And every single one of those figures is a very weird snake person or like a guy wearing like punk rock chains with like horns on his head.
Yeah.
They're all aliens and wrestling buff weird.
Yeah.
Each one's its own little character, but you didn't have any
sense of
anyone
when
else's,
it was going to end or what the next dude was going to look like.
And
I call them dudes, but they are not gender specific. They could be any gender.
They
You
might
could open
literally
it up.
all be dudes.
They might literally all
I'm not
be
sure
dudes.
there's a female one.
Oh, yeah? But if we turn them upside down like you do kittens, you you do not see parts. So, I mean, they're all wearing pants.
Yes.
So,
None of the ones I've brought here, but most of them are not wearing shirts because they're 80s wrestlers.
oh, right.
And so I loved these as a child.
Yes.
And the good news is they retailed for about 25 cents a piece
Yeah.
on today's market.
Yes.
Each one is worth approximately 50 cents.
Doubled.
If you don't count inflation,
Yep.
they've held their value excellently. We would be fools not to stock up.
We would be.
And that's why I have all 236 and more various
You have doubles?
variants. They started.
there's variants.
Well, they started coming out in different colors.
Okay.
There's accessories. There's
Sure.
an 8-bit Nintendo game. There's a wrestling ring you can put them in.
Wait, then now there's a video game?
There was
Okay.
for the original Nintendo.
Okay.
So there's a small, but there's maybe a dozen additional
Right.
related things.
Right.
But we never got any of the source material, which I've only been able to access as an adult, and it turns out is also tons of fun.
Tons of fun. It's, so, Kinnikuman?
Kinnikuman.
Kinnikuman.
Kin is human.
Right.
Niku is meat. So
Okay.
Kinniku is muscle.
Okay.
Human meat is muscle. So these are muscle men.
They're muscle men.
And that was translated into muscle, the acronym millions of unusually small creatures lurking everywhere.
Right.
And Mattel
made them.
Mattel imported them or remade, had the American rights.
Right.
They did try to make a line for girls,
Okay.
an unrelated to the cartoon from Japan,
Sure.
because there's lots of capsule toys in Japan, lots of this scale figures, figural erasers that then just became not erasers.
Right.
So Mattel released a line called Cuties, Cuties, which is coolest ultra tiny individuals on Earth, I believe.
Something along
Definitely tweet at me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
I'm the only one that cares.
At Jason Van Glass. He is the only one who cares. Let him know if you too care.
Those are not worth anything.
They did not hold their value.
Well, they're probably worth 25 cents a piece, which
Okay.
is what they probably cost. And I have a complete set of those is, maybe
How many of those are there?
maybe 60. Those came in prepackaged sets. So there's a set of punk rock girls.
Okay.
There's a set of aerobics, remember when aerobics was a trend?
I do.
This sounds
I do.
like if you picture a Japanese aerobics toy, you're thinking way too sexy. These are
These
women
are
with
worker
barbells wearing
Yes.
80s hair.
bees. Yep.
Because it's for
So
girls.
it's big hair. Big hair. Did you bring any of the girl ones?
I didn't have those handy.
Fair enough.
Because those I have a set of them. And they're in a larger
vault?
They're in a larger box at
Yes.
my parents' house.
Okay.
And that box is marked Cuties.
Yes.
Big
Sure.
Sharpie. Worthless. And then under that, keep forever. So I have those stashed in the vault. It's
thank
important
God.
we don't throw them away.
Don't throw them out.
But they're worth.
But they are
the
not
whole box
worth-
is worth $12.
Exactly. This is not something that anyone should steal, is what you're saying. So now, what I want to know is,
Yes.
there is manga. There is also a cartoon, hundreds of episodes possibly. Have those episodes been translated into English? Are there subtitled versions like Dragon Ball Z?
For the most part, no.
Okay.
There, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was Kinnikuman's second generation, the TNG of muscle cartoons.
Yes.
And some of those manga and maybe some of that anime was translated. That was brought to America.
Okay. But not because I don't know who would want to own a complete set of those DVDs, but I'm sure I know someone. If they were in English.
The market exists.
The market does exist.
10 years ago, a friend gave me DVD-Rs of all the episodes in Japanese
Oh, there you go.
with English subtitles, but from like a Japanese box set.
Okay.
So there's a small but loyal
Right.
following.
So there is I'm
not the only
English.
person.
You are almost alone, but we're never alone, Jason. You know that. Jason Van Glass, by the way, stand-up comic, and you will be in Kansas City, Missouri, September 27th and 28th.
That's correct.
You don't know where, but if people go to
plan
Twitter
to find out before I arrive.
and Instagram, exactly. Though I will tell you this, back in the 80s, you could just drive to a small town, which Kansas City is not. Go to a gas station and ask where the stand-up comedy was, and someone would tell you.
Yeah.
So, but it's at Jason, Jason, Van, Vanglass, Jason Van Glass.
On all social media.
On all the social medias.
Venmo.
So
Find me.
find him.
Send me a quarter.
Exactly. And you will not receive a cutie because he's hoarding
No,
them.
because they're in a vault.
And they're invaluable, except for worthless. Together at last, those two words. Okay, so are these two that you've pulled out actual characters that you've named? Did you name them?
This one is his Japanese character name is Sunshine.
Okay.
And
He is a robot.
he's a shape-shifting robot-looking guy.
Yeah.
In the Japanese cartoon, which we would have no way of knowing based on this, he's like a sand-shifting creature.
Yeah.
So he's like an Egyptian-themed sand guy. So he can take on... one of the toys is him as a top.
Oh, okay.
One of the toys is him as like a arch, like a Roman arch.
Okay.
So he's a shapeshifter made out of little like sand bricks.
Oh.
And
so this is one version of him.
this one, this guy's Sunshine, and he has like 5 or 6 different toys in the line.
In the line. So you could have gotten another one of him, and you did. But one could have gotten another version of him.
You might have gotten him as a top with his little head on top.
And are they all the same color, and that's how you know?
The original ones were every single figure was this pink kind of eraser color.
Okay, and then next
later
versions.
they started coming out the same figures but in different colors.
Okay, let me look on the back of this and see what can be learned from any sort of imprinting.
This will be easier to read.
Oh, that is much larger.
So I've brought with
It
me
looks like
some.
a giant
I've brought with me
eraser.
some Japanese ones.
Okay.
The American ones were exclusively 1 inch tall.
Okay.
And the Japanese ones were primarily 1 inch tall. But in Japan, because it's
Hugely
still on the
popular.
air, sold millions and millions of copies, hundreds of episodes, there are various larger
This
size
character
things.
is wearing a shirt that says meat.
Yeah, because kinniku is human
Kinniku
meat, which is the word
means-
for muscle. But the origin of the kanji that are used to say the word muscle is human meat.
Right.
So that's kid meat, because
That-
the main character, who I don't have a figure of with me, is Muscle Man.
Muscle Man is his...
So this is his like sidekick friend, presumably.
Right. Who is
But-
just called meat.
Who could say?
Who could say, and even though Kinnikuman means muscle man, and that means human meat, they've chosen to spell the word meat in English on his t-shirt, and this is a Japanese toy.
Yes.
All right. I love the fact that they're like, it's cool. English
Yes.
is a great language.
One of the characters is named Ramen Man.
Oh, hello, Noodle Man.
And he's a pretty crude Chinese stereotype. He has a Fu Manchu mustache, and he fights with 2 woks.
With cooking woks.
And he wears like one of those kung fu button-up shirts. And so much like real American, well, I won't say real, much like 80s American wrestling.
Yes.
Parody Japanese wrestling of the 80s also had crude ethnic stereotypes.
that will be frowned upon and doesn't necessarily hold
one
up.
of the characters is Ramen Man, but there's all aliens. There's.
But isn't ramen Japanese?
You would think.
And then, but the character itself has co-opted. Well, that's where it's justified. He's co-opted the Japanese, and they're like, "Well, we're going to make him a stereotypical Chinese guy." Well, that's fascinating. What? Okay, so this is a bigger one, and so there's 236
of the American 1 inch ones. There's 236 figures.
Okay.
There's some figures that were released in Japan that didn't make it here.
Okay.
And then in Japan, there's also those same characters, but on different scales.
Right.
Because over the last 30 years, there's been
It continues to grow.
uncountable number of different releases and projects and toys and special editions.
And new characters? Or are they working with the same?
Same characters for the first series.
Okay.
I assume that the Next Generation, much like Star Trek, the Next Generation has... In the Next Generation, I think they're all older, like 40 years older, so there's new characters in that.
Okay. Yeah. Why wouldn't they be? But it's been 40 years and these characters.
So my favorite is Sunshine the Robot, and that's why I have a collection of just Japanese weird scale versions of this one character.
Okay.
Which will be thrilling to the listeners at home who can't see what we're doing, including my prized possession, this absolutely gigantic one.
It is, and also super heavy. It is dense.
The Japanese toys of the 80s were very high quality.
And so these were made in the 80s?
Yes.
These are all from the 80s?
Yeah.
Now, this one is probably, 5 inches?
Yeah,
6
5 or
inches
6
tall?
inches.
5 or 6 inches tall. The original one, 1 inch.
Right.
This is a terrifying group of smiling men.
Yeah.
What is it called? Smile?
His name is Sunshine.
Sunshine.
You can see he has a rolling press in his chest here, so he does morph, even though all of these are not in.
They're not.
He can become a pyramid. One of the original 1-inch ones is him as a pyramid.
Oh my God! Do you have any of the ones where he looks like a rolling pin or
not
whatever?
on me.
Not on you. Also in storage. So, but I like that you have literally like 5 different sizes of the same guy.
You asked for a photo to attach to this podcast of myself, and I will be including this photo of me in my handmade
Cosplay.
Halloween costume as a 6-foot-tall version of this 1-inch toy.
Oh my God! Yes, please. That is Sunshine.
Yeah.
And
it's me wearing cardboard boxes spray painted eraser color.
Eraser
if you're
color
at home and this didn't load on your iTunes.
It will load on their iTunes because I will make it so. And then I will also take a picture of these so that the world can see exactly what we're looking at.
What we've been
here.
talking about for 20 minutes.
Exactly. We're 24 minutes into this thing.
Sure.
And Sunshine has now been fully explained. He seems happy in this one. He's got lips and a
he's
and
a smile. It's unclear if he's a good or a bad guy to me, as someone that's only
briefly into the.
I've watched the cartoon on YouTube or poked through the manga, but I'm afraid to learn too much about the story because, as I said, what I loved about it was that unlike every other toy line, all of it was a mystery,
right?
And you kept getting these weird little dudes, and you could name them anything you wanted. You could decide who was on what team.
Did you name him anything besides Sunshine, or had you been told?
No, I learned that name later as an adult.
Right, and so did you wrestle with these characters as a child?
Yeah, you play in the sandbox with them, and because they were marketed with like a wrestling ring, it was implied that they should definitely be like punching
fight.
each other or whatever.
There should definitely be some sort of wrestling going on. That is awesome. What else? So Sunshine, what is the name of this character?
I believe his Japanese name is like Kid Meat, and he's the kid sidekick to the main guy who's like Muscle Man.
Man.
So meat is a pun because the kanji for muscle involves the kanji for meat.
Right.
So if you have a smaller version of muscle, you just have meat.
A smaller version of meat. And smaller version of muscles. Yeah. Okay. Wow. What other, do you want to show me some more dudes and tell me what their deal is?
Don't have any more of these little toys on me.
Right.
But
because you brought
I'm a collector.
Felt like a big box.
There's a second box of things here.
Second box of other things that you collect. You do enjoy collecting things, this I know.
Yes, but it's very focused.
Oh well, I mean, you've chosen a thing, and then do you mean
guess,
thorough?
No, it's niche.
Okay.
And it's niche. As I mentioned, the muscle men are basically worthless, which is great news.
Great news for the
because
collectors.
There's 236 of them. So for
get in,
a couple $100, you're done.
Get in now,
and that's a hallmark of what I'm able to collect.
Right. It is one of the things that you're good at is collecting.
Well, I'm not. I'm priced out of some other markets.
Right. If you could collect anything,
like a DeLorean.
Okay.
You know how much? It'd be pretty cool to have a DeLorean.
Yep.
Even though they didn't work when they were new.
Right. They do. They're not good cars.
Don't work now.
Nope. You can't go shopping in them.
And the problem with this plan is that they're like $40,000.
Right.
So it's a beautiful, weird, funny car that would just be like a constant headache. And if it was $4,000, I'd have 2 of them.
Right.
And I'd use the second one to fix the first one.
Oh, there you go for parts.
But they're $36,000, and so it's
you don't have either.
Right.
So what you have is a desire one day to own something to park and look at.
I guess
if you had all the money,
more than that, the things I'm collecting are DeLoreans, but they're 50 cents or they're $5.
Okay.
And there are some things that are of interest to me, but if they're $500 for a comic book,
no,
I think I'd rather have 1,000 muscle figures.
What about, is there a time frame that you're definitely drawn to when you collect things?
Well, the 80s toys are my childhood toys.
Okay.
So Ninja Turtles, Transformers.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That's just what my
Right. I don't really collect anything. It's weird. Oh, you know what? I did at one point collect all-clad cookware. But that was only because a friend of mine had it, and she said it was great.
Was it vintage?
Nope. It brand new.
So
and,
this is you just went to Target.
I just went over to the Williams-Sonoma and spent too much money. It really doesn't
as collecting.
It isn't
vintage Pyrex. I would have given you.
Right. I'm not. Yeah, or Fiesta ware. Some people collect Fiesta ware. My mother-in-law does, for example. I don't care. So yeah, I don't collect things. Andy does. We get a lot of stuff around the house.
Yeah, I noticed.
Yeah. So I can show you his Hot Wheel collection. It's one of the things he loves about the Hot Wheel collection is that Hot Wheels are still $1.
Right.
That's what he likes about them. They're 99 cents.
Right.
The ones that he collects, though, are character cars for different TV and movies. They are $3.99.
Oh,
and
boy.
So he's been almost priced out.
That's almost DeLorean money.
Yeah, it's almost
on the
DeLorean
Hot Wheels
money.
scale.
So what else are you collecting?
Some of the things I collect are recalled comic books.
Oh, that's right. The unique.
So I collect comic books, but the 3 or 4 things I collect are these niche things that have not been priced out of. Like if you want the first appearance of Spider-Man,
right?
The only thing stopping you is money. You could buy one. You could buy one before this podcast was over on eBay. They're on the market.
How many copies of that are there? Hundreds of copies of it?
However many there are, they've all been discovered and brought to market.
Okay.
And it has a known price.
And someone will sell it.
Whereas a lot of the things I'm looking for come up once every 3 years.
I would like to back up quickly. How much is the first? If you wanted the first
well, it depends very strictly on condition.
Okay.
I'm just going to ballpark here.
Yep.
They've tended to go up every year. Bad condition, $5,000.
Wow.
Perfect condition, best copy in the world, $500,000, maybe more.
Holy smokes.
But it's because there's one of those.
Okay. Because somebody was
on Amazing Spider-Man, I don't know the numbers exactly, but on Action Comics #1, the first Superman, which was a publishing sensation in 1939.
Okay.
They printed 250,000 of them and sold out, so they made 200,000 more.
Yeah.
So they made close to 500,000 of them. It was the Pokemon of 1939.
Right.
We're still making it today. It was so big in 1939.
Yeah.
There are approximately 100 copies known.
Okay.
So out of 450,000 copies printed of something that everyone went crazy about and loved, about 100 copies exist.
Right.
And we've been looking for them for 50 years.
Yeah.
So occasionally one is discovered. But really there's a high incentive to find these, and people have been looking.
Right.
And one thing that happened is that during the war, there was paper drives for the war effort. So not only were these considered the same as saving a newspaper.
Right.
Or an old People magazine or something.
Yeah.
Not only were they considered to be ephemeral. It wasn't really
a book.
They were considered to be ephemeral.
Yeah.
And during the war effort, to the extent that they hadn't been thrown away yet, people went door to door collecting them to recycle.
Right.
So most pre-war American comic books were recycled to beat the Nazis.
Yeah.
And so that's why.
Worth the effort. But so how much to have a halfway decent copy?
I believe Nick Cage spent $1 million on one and then later had to sell it due to his financial troubles. So the very best copies, which aren't even in perfect condition, they're in 8 out of 10 condition, and there's 2 or 3 of them in that range, let's say.
Yeah.
And those are $1 million more, priceless, more than that.
Wow.
I don't know what the current record sale is, but it's it's a worldwide icon that there's 3 of.
Right.
So if you're an investment banker, or Nick Cage before the IRS finds out, it's a perfect.
It's the perfect gift for the bazillionaire in your life.
And so while I might be interested in
owning such a thing,
1940s comic books just in general, well,
Yeah.
they're prohibitively expensive and very, very rare. So Action Comics #1, I'm sure you could find one for sale
Okay.
at an auction house as we speak.
Right.
That, they're all on the market. They're considered high-end investment
Okay.
things. And so you could go buy one this week
Okay.
if you had $250,000 laying around.
Okay.
A lot of the stuff
Note
I
to
collect,
self, Rangers.
and also the internet has changed this. It used to be that if you needed Amazing Spider-Man #47, that was the one you're missing.
Yeah.
You had to hope you'd run into it.
Right. You had to go to Comic-Con.
Bookstores, comic book shops, dusty back rooms, garage sales, and just hope you found the one random thing you were missing. Mm-hmm. And the internet's changed all that. It means you can buy almost anything. You may not agree. You may not like the price, but whatever it is you need, it's there.
Right.
And so, things I'm collecting are things that are unpopular or obscure enough that that's not the case because people don't bring them to market, or they aren't valuable enough to be looking for to resell.
What are they? My ad. I'm about to do an ad. This is an ad for Audible. They're introducing Audible Originals, a new member benefit. 2 Audible Originals and 1 audiobook every month. Audible Originals are exclusive audio titles created by celebrated story titles from worlds as diverse as theater, journalism, literature, and more, including me, Jackie Cation. I'm the more. I've done some Audible Originals. And one of my favorite Audible books, I think I've mentioned it before, is Assassination Vacation, the Sarah Vowell book that I beloved. I downloaded it. I listened to it over and over and over again, as a matter of fact, because it's great. So you get your first audiobook free, and you choose 2 titles from a curated list of Audible Originals when you try Audible for 30 days. Visit audible.com/dork or text dork to 500-500 to get started. You guys know Audible. It's really great. I love listening to Audible on long drives, on long sitting arounds. Listening lets you get more books into your life because with the free Audible app, you can enjoy them anytime. You guys know the deal. Audible is great. Go to audible.com/dork. And Audible is spelled AUDIBLE.com, COM/dork, DORK. Rangers know how to spell dork. So go to audible.com/dork or text dork to 500-500 to get started. Let's get back into the show.
Where to begin? I collect zines.
Magazines.
Zines.
A different word. What is zine?
A zine is a self-published, Xeroxed, small, independently released
Okay.
thing. So when Xerox machines in the late 70s, early 80s became accessible to the public, people started putting out their own comic books and magazines.
Yeah.
They might make 10 copies, they might make 1,000.
Right.
But these little homemade, handmade zines.
Right.
And so the ones I look for are ones that are, one of them is Boing Boing magazine, which later became a website, very popular website, started as a zine.
Okay.
And then became a magazine, and then became a website.
Okay. When did it start as a zine?
Late 80s.
Okay.
So late 80s to early 90s, there was a little bit of like an independent zine magazine boom.
Okay.
And then they were early to get on the internet.
All of this sounds vaguely familiar.
That's one that I collect.
What is it like? What was the original zine of Boing Boing?
Similar to the website, it was focused on tech news, outsider art.
Okay.
So
it was a it was
a magazine about the kind of pop culture things that
they were interested in,
that hipsters in 1988 in Colorado were interested in. Excellent. So it was into Robert Anton Wilson. Okay. It was into painting your hot rod or like modding out your bicycle. It was into science fiction that was being published. Okay. It was a, so that's Boing Boing. That's one of the ones I've collected.
And do you have you been able to find some good early ones?
Yes. I have like one copy of #1 and one copy of #2, which were handmade by Mark Frauenfelder, the founder of this thing.
Okay.
So it grew.
Of course you know his name. It was one guy who started it.
At the time, and I believe his wife might have been involved.
Mark Frauenfelder?
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not saying that right, but
Sure.
he's the founder of Boing Boing. And
Right.
so it grew from something he was making that was just about the art and culture that he was into.
Right.
Started getting more contributors.
You know what this is?
Eventually became one of the largest websites in the world.
In 1988, when The Onion started in Madison,
Yes.
Wisconsin, where I went to college and graduated
Yes.
from in 1988, I remember just Xerox copies of The Onion.
A perfect example.
That would have
exact
been
same time
something-
period. The technology existed to let people put out
Their own
thing with if they had the initiative to do it.
Yeah.
They didn't need an editor or $1 million.
He was a
And
dishwasher.
so The Onion was like a zine
Yeah.
or campus newspaper that became what the thing we know today.
Right.
But it started as like just a couple of people
Right.
doing something they thought was cool.
Would that I had such a copy, and granted, it might not be worth anything, but it would also be kind of fascinating.
I don't happen to have any of those, but it's exactly the kind of thing I would gladly
Be
spend
psyched
$10
to have.
on.
Right.
A 30-year-old physical copy of The Onion.
If I had such a
interesting
thing,
to me.
I would give it to you.
Right.
Because you would keep it nice.
And what I do have in that vein is a zine called Army Man,
okay.
which came out in the late 80s. There were 3 issues of it. Each one was 4 pages, like 2 sheets of paper.
Okay.
And it was all comedy writing. And it was published by someone that had worked at SNL
Okay.
for a little bit and then moved back to Denver.
Okay.
And so the contributors to it included Jack Handy and Bill Odenkirk, I believe. It included Jack Handy wrote Deep Thoughts on
Thank you.
SNL. So it included SNL writers of the 80s contributing things.
Right.
And only 3 issues were made.
Okay.
I'd be surprised if the print run was more than a couple of hundred copies.
Right.
I imagine most of them were lost. Mm-hmm. But importantly to comedy nerds,
Yes.
such as myself,
So
is that when season 1 of The Simpsons was staffed,
okay.
I believe Sam Simon had been on the mailing list for this zine.
Okay.
And he staffed The Simpsons with everyone that had been published in Army Man.
Oh wow.
And so more than of the 24 contributors
Yeah.
to the 6 pages that exist of Army Man,
Yeah.
more than a dozen of them write on The Simpsons.
To this day, some of them still.
Certainly on the early seasons.
Right. Right.
So The Simpsons was created in large part out of this very small piece of paper.
Yes.
And to me, that's so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
That's fascinating.
so twice now in 15 years, these
Yes.
have been brought to auction, and I've been the winner both times.
Oh, there you go.
And I believe I paid about $50 per issue.
Okay.
But since they only come up every 5 years,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
yeah.
as I said, I imagine that there's a few hundred at most were probably printed.
Is this something that you would want to get the contributors to sign? Would that
No,
add anything to
that
it?
That doesn't tickle my
That
funny
doesn't
bone.
add to it at all. It's the thing you want is their content and the existence of that thing.
And to me, the objects that I collect have a physical quality.
Yeah.
So like I used to work in a comic book store.
Okay.
Which is why I was nervous to come on this podcast, because the one thing I learned in a comic book store
Yes.
is to not bother people with your dorkdoms.
This is the safest space in the
No,
world for you.
I know this is a safe space, but my main takeaway from working in a comic book store
Is to keep it together.
was never, under any circumstances, explain the rules of the Yu-Gi-Oh card game to someone while they're at work. Because many children and some adults attempted to do that repeatedly to me.
Right.
And,
right.
Yu-Gi-Oh card game is not my dorkdom, and I don't care what the rules are.
Right.
And
You don't.
and so I
You would like to create that same safe space for others.
so I rarely discuss
People-
any of this with anyone.
Right.
Because I
And-
internalize that phobia.
And with the Rangers of the Dork Forest, they pick and choose sometimes by topic, and sometimes they listen to a topic that they have no interest in it, and yet they are fascinated by your interest.
By my illness.
Right. Your,
So something that connects the various little niche things I'm collecting, something that unites them, I think, is that they are like Army Man, the zine. There's something that's a physical object that's small, that has some legacy or history to it, either in the creation of it or in its aftermath. That Boing Boing became this website that I enjoyed, that Army Man became this television show that I loved, that there's one from the 60s, a magazine called The Realist. It was published by a comedian named Paul Krasner.
Okay.
Paul's still alive, and he's out in Palm Desert, I believe.
Okay.
And he's the ghostwriter of Lenny Bruce's autobiography.
Okay.
So he was a fascinating dude.
Yeah.
When he was a teenager, he was intern basically at Mad Magazine, like the first 2 years of Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
He lost his virginity at the Mad Magazine offices because he had nowhere else to go.
Right.
From
Lenny Bruce. No. Any idea who he spoke with?
He does stand up because Lenny Bruce told him to.
Okay.
His
name's Paul Krasner? Krasner.
Fascinating guy. He was friends with John and Yoko. He was friends with the Yippies. He was part of the Chicago 1968 Democratic Convention trial.
Okay. So
personal
a guy
friend,
with an amazing,
just connected to all these different parts of history
coming out of his ears.
And
I'm sure.
he published 100 issues of a magazine, basically a zine. Basically the first alternative newspaper. It was called The Realist. He started publishing in 1958.
Okay.
And the first issue
1958?
Yes.
He must have had
he had worked at Mad, and then he had worked at newspapers.
Yeah.
And so in 1958 he started publishing The Realist, which was an alternative newspaper.
Okay.
And initially The Realist would publish things that your local editor wouldn't let you publish.
Okay.
So if you worked in the South and you wanted to write about civil rights in 1958, the newspaper, your boss would probably quash.
Yeah. Right.
Quash that. So it ended up publishing a lot of things that were too hot to run at professional newspaper.
Okay.
And it was on the very forefront of...
Where did he distribute it?
So it was distributed by mail.
Okay.
And so the early issues had a couple thousand printed.
Yeah.
But at its peak in 1969, 1970, it had over 100,000 subscribers. So it started small.
Yeah.
And it got huge.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why is that it presages that 1968 counterculture. So in the early 60s, he was publishing articles written by Tim Leary while Tim Leary was still at Harvard.
Right.
He was publishing articles by Robert Anton Wilson about how computers are going to get smart enough that there's going to be a network, and we're going to have a network of computers that will communicate on in 1964.
Right.
He wrote all this stuff about, or published all these things about drugs, drug use, acid, research.
I'm sure he did.
So, but he was 5 years ahead of the curve. He was a bit older than the generation of love.
Right.
And he was cool. And one of the fun things about it is also it's that he's a comedian.
Right.
And so even though he's publishing things about the internet in the 60s or about Tim Leary or about Lenny Bruce published things in this newspaper while he was still alive, and then of course his trial was heavily covered in the Realist newspaper.
Sure.
So and
in his act, I don't know. Have you ever heard that Lenny Bruce album where he reads from his transcripts?
Yeah, it doesn't. He becomes obsessed with it, and I kind of get why. But
no, I totally get why.
Yeah.
But still got to write punchlines, man. Anyway, but I had that album. Anyway,
so the most famous thing the Realist ever published was a centerfold, a drawing by Wally Wood, a very weird 1950s comic book artist.
Okay.
And it's called the Disneyland Memorial Orgy. And when Walt Disney died, Wally Wood published in The Realist this centerfold that was all of the Disney characters having graphic sex with each other. And that made a splash. That's the most famous thing they ever published. But it was comedic. You know what I mean? So he was The Realist for all of its real journalism, too. Well, what I like about it is, like, I'm a comedian, and I just love that this guy was a prankster, basically. Yeah,
and willing to just bring it to some extent. That's awesome. Do you have now? What do you? How many copies of that do you have?
I have 99 of the 100 original copies.
What?
If anyone out there has number 11, I believe
the Realist number 11.
I got $20 on it. You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure that's the number I need. The later numbers are very much easier to find because it started very small in the late 50s, and as I said, it was being distributed in head shops by the peak of it. So it was
Right, but those first 20 issues.
Yeah, the first 20 issues are
probably very hard to. I can't.
Very hard to come by, but not necessarily valuable.
99 of 100 issues you have.
Yes,
that's neat. That's really. I don't care, but I care because that's awesome. That's
It's satisfying to me to just put everything back together.
Right, right. Fair enough. Fair enough.
To pick up the things that have been dispersed to the winds, and let's just put these in a box. They belong with each other.
Yes.
There's a certain order to it.
Have you ever gotten to meet him, the guy?
I have not, and
he's got to be super old at this point, right?
He's older, and
no, super old. No, I'm kidding. It's
I am halfway through the process. I'm publishing a zine of my own.
Oh, nice.
And I got Paul Krasner's address from the internet.
Okay.
And I'm going to cold mail a copy to him.
Right, what the heck?
And hopefully it won't freak him out, but as we've discussed, this is someone that was self-publishing alternative comedy in the 50s.
Right.
And was when the Beatles broke up, he and John hung out in Watsonville for the summer.
Oh my God.
So he's not just acquaintance with John Lennon. He was friends with all these cool people because he was so cool.
Right.
And so he spent the summer in Watsonville up the California coast with John. John thought everyone was spying on him because, they're taking acid all day or whatever.
Right.
And Paul, to steal another of Paul's great stories, Paul Krasner's great stories, of course, Paul Krasner was telling him, you're paranoid. It's because you're high.
Right.
And then later they found out, no, the FBI was 100% spying on them. There were people with binoculars. The phones were tapped. The government was following them around.
Right. They were too popular.
And
so
additionally, they were on acid.
They were also on acid. Wow, that's so... Okay, so is there a list? I'm sure when you get the copies or if and when you pour over these issues of something like that from the 50s and 60s and you recognize the names.
Yeah.
What other... have you just sort of kept a copy of the names in the hope?
In the hope of what?
Of someone new coming up and becoming famous again. Or sort of you're all of a sudden, I don't know, I can't think of anyone's name ever, so I don't know why I'm
Everyone's
come up
dead.
with everyone.
It's Tim Leary, it's Lenny Bruce. A lot of them.
But Moms Mabley. I mean, are there any weird? Because it goes till 68, 69 is the peak. You said how much further did it go past that?
The last original issue is 72 or 74 maybe.
Okay, and then
the format starts changing. Postal rules dictated a lot of what the format was and what you could mail through the mail.
Okay. Weird.
So the format started changing because postal rules dictate the dimensions of things. And also sometimes the content.
Yes, they do. Okay. So that so
he in the late 60s, we talked about the late 80s zine boom. In the late 60s there was the alternative newspaper boom. So the Berkeley Barb was a local hippie, Berkeley, California-based newspaper with anti-Vietnam War information, pro-drug information. And that happened all over the country. LA had one. The Village Voice is sort of an example of this. New York had a couple of different hippie publications.
Right.
Because in the late 60s, not only was there the whole counterculture, newsprint technology got accessible enough that a committed group of individuals could run a business in a way that wasn't possible in the 40s when owning newspaper equipment meant you were a billionaire or whatever, you know what I mean?
Right.
You were a Republican.
Yeah, you had access.
Hedge fund villain.
Right. Sort of like the way the internet has sort of opened up all kinds of things when Xerox invented a copier. And so it's movable type, man.
And the opening of that access is interesting to me too, because you get the hippie perspective, but the Black Power movement was publishing its own newspapers. Right. Anybody could. And those voices are way more interesting than whatever the LA Times was publishing in 1968.
Right. I mean, just anyone who had been marginalized, if they could get a couple $100 together, could start printing their own,
perhaps profitably.
And just sort of spreading the truth. To
and you see the same thing with the underground comics at the time. Robert Crumb is, in the late 60s, the technology existed for someone like Robert Crumb, who was very talented, but making his own weird art,
Right.
to publish a comic book.
Yeah. Do you have any of that? Are there comics?
Yes, because I grew up in the East Bay area. I grew up right near Oakland, right near Berkeley, which was an epicenter of underground comics.
Okay.
My years spent garage sailing and flea marketing have yielded a huge number of underground comics that would not be possible if I lived anywhere else in the country.
Okay.
Because most of those Crumb comic books, most of the underground comics in general, were published in Berkeley or maybe the San Francisco.
Okay.
That's where Crumb lived. Was in San Francisco. He pushed Baby Carriage with Zap Zero, his first book, around the Haight in like 1966, selling them for $0.25.
Oh my God. Okay.
Which is as fun as anything that's in the book. Like, I like that more than I like Robert Crumb's storytelling.
Right.
I love that history of that artifact, and that if you find one, that it has this.
It was there.
It has this lineage.
Yeah. Fair enough. You know that someone who I never had on the Dork Forest, but I always wanted to, is my friend Maureen Fitzpatrick, who collects accordions. And one of her favorite ways to collect accordions, much like growing up where you grew up, making it accessible by going to those flea markets and garage sales. She grew up in western Iowa and has spent a fair amount of time traveling around rural Wisconsin and Minnesota. Yeah. And there are more accordions in tiny towns.
The level of accordion per garage sale is off the charts.
It's a little more. The odds are there's probably going to be one. And it's such an interesting, the fact that happened because you were right there near Berkeley and Oakland and those places. So that's fascinating. What's in that box?
So I've brought some Al Hartley Spire Christian comic books.
Al Hartley Spire. I'm writing that down. What is that? Now.
Unfortunately, I don't have a copy on me of his masterpiece. Let's start at the beginning. Al Hartley was a comic book artist. He worked at Marvel in the late 50s and early 60s with Stan Lee. He drew early Thor stories.
Okay.
And a bunch of romance comics. Mm-hmm. And then he moved to Archie.
Okay.
And he was a born-again Christian. And Archie's...
in his later life?
I don't know if he became born-again or not, but he was a deeply committed
religious
evangelical Christian. Mm-hmm. And Archie Comics... like many parts of comic history, was Jewish.
Okay.
You know, Stan Lee's last name is Lieber. Superman is created by two Jewish teenagers from Cleveland.
Okay.
But Al Hartley happened to be religiously Christian, and he asked the publishers at Archie if they would help him publish Christian comic books.
Okay.
So, sort of as evangelical books that would be accessible for children, but would have Christian messages in them.
Davy and Goliath.
And so some of them are literally Archie books, but with Christian themes.
Oh, weird. So he wrote and drew them?
So in this case, he wrote and drew them.
Okay.
So we have like Archie's date book, and it doesn't look that different than a typical Archie book. It's drawn by one of the stable of Archie artists, which is Al Hartley, but the message in it is Christian, not necessarily converting people to Christianity, but the lessons you want children to learn from Christianity about be nice to people, don't lie to
or be like the
your
nice
parents,
man in the
don't
pictures,
lie to,
and respect your parents and all this kind of thing.
And so the Archie publishers did help Al Hartley set up. They set up a subcategory called sub-publisher called Spire.
Oh,
and Spire published about 55 books by Al Hartley, comic books.
55 different titles?
Different titles over like a 20-year period.
Okay. All by Al Hartley.
All by Al Hartley.
With a very
all drawn in the style of an Archie comic book from the 70s.
Okay.
So very beautiful pop art.
Yeah, that's
like a comic, like if a comic book had a style, it's the 70s Archie book, just like a big-eyed, big-faced, colorful books.
Right.
About a dozen of them were Archie characters that he had permission to use Archie and Betty and Veronica and tell kind of Christianized stories with them.
All right.
Some of them were biographies of evangelical preachers and other
On the Road with
televangelists.
Andre Crouch.
So this one's Andre Crouch. He was a black soul singer, evangelical. Some of them were...
Do you have 3 copies of this?
Yes. Now,
So it's
again,
a dupe.
what's important about this is
Yes.
that, with a couple of exceptions, these are basically worthless.
Right.
I love them. I think they're so spectacular.
Right.
But they're not Spider-Man, and very few other people care.
Right.
Which is great. Great news
That's
for
fine.
me.
Great news for you.
So-
Then you can get them all. Do you have them all?
Yes.
You have all of this 55...
Unfortunately, I don't have them all with me.
No, that's...
So some of them were adapted from books, from memoirs of how people came to Christianity. So this one's called The Hiding Place, and it's the story of a woman who survived the Holocaust, but told in the style of an Archie comic book.
Wow.
Which leads into the masterpiece, which unfortunately I don't have with me. It's
Right.
one of my favorite comic books of all time, not even ironically, literally.
Right.
It's called Hansi, the Girl Who Loved the Swastika.
Wait a minute. I've heard of Hansi, the Girl Who Loved the Swastika. Maybe from you.
It's a masterpiece.
Is it a masterpiece?
And it's one of the ones that's more valuable because other people want it because it has such a bizarre title and spectacularly colorful cover. It's pop art.
And Al Hartley
yes.
drew and wrote it.
He adapted it from the biography of a real woman who was not Jewish. She joined the Nazi youth during the war.
How old was she?
Like a teenager, but
Okay.
as like a 17-year-old when the Germans showed up in, I believe, Austria or wherever she was.
So like Sound of Music.
Exactly like Sound of Music.
France.
She believed in it.
Oh, okay. Good Lord.
The larger moral of her biography and of the comic book, as her life story reduced to 22 pages, is that it was a mistake to believe in the Nazis.
Yes.
Because the only thing you should give your faith to is Christ.
Oh, interesting. But she got
in
sucked
the course of that story, she spends time in a Russian POW camp. She has to cross over the river. There's rape in this story, but all of it's drawn in an Archie comic book style.
What?
She's in a Russian prison camp, and one of the other girls says to her when the soldiers come in to abuse the women.
Yes.
In the Archie style comic book, her friend says to her, "You're lucky you're so skinny. They don't like skinny girls."
Oh my God.
And that's in a pure Archie
With
drawing
Archie
style.
art.
And so that one's somewhat valuable because it's much like Plan 9 from Outer Space or something like.
Right.
Lots of people think that's pretty weird.
Just
it's something they want a copy of.
Right, they want a copy of it because it's weird. And you have a copy of that.
Yes, but not with me. What I do have is Hello, I'm Johnny Cash, which is the adaptation.
I'm so glad we're going to leave on Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
It's the adaptation of Johnny Cash's
biography?
return to Christianity.
Did he go away?
He struggled.
Okay. Did he struggle? That'll happen.
I'm not a Johnny Cash expert,
Right.
but I believe he spent a couple of days in a cave doing drugs
Okay.
in the mid-'60s,
Sure.
which is then depicted in this
Oh, and
beautifully drawn. If you flip through this, you see it has very spectacular pop art, worthy of a Roy Lichtenstein.
And what year is this? Did this come out?
The book's probably from the early 70s.
Right, okay, because this actually looks like sort of I only read, as a child, I read comic books mostly in the late 70s, and it has that paper feel to it.
It's 1976.
Okay, and it has that feel because I read mostly team-up Spider-Mans, so very specific.
So this is all about Johnny Cash doing pills.
Yeah.
And
in 1950,
and undermining his marriage with June Carter. Who loves him and wants him to, turn to the Bible.
Come back.
To help with his reckless brawling and drug use.
Wow. Oh, she had a dream. That mountain. Last night I dreamt you were on that mountain. Oh, typo. A lettering error. On Van Mountain.
Oh no!
Oh, there you go.
I'll write a letter.
Please write a letter at this late date. That's fascinating.
This one's called Born Again.
Yes, it is.
It's an adaptation of Chuck Colson, who went to prison for Watergate. He was one of Nixon's henchmen, hatchet men. He served
Jason
time.
Van Glass, you are fascinating depths.
He served time in prison and then became a born-again Christian in prison and wrote a biography that completely absolves him of his complicity in all of the crimes of the Nixon administration.
All you have to do is write that book, and then all of a sudden everybody... Did he ever get out? How did it all work out?
He served like a year or something.
Yeah,
but he rebranded himself as
the Christian,
as a Christian, and the amount of whitewashing that happens in this version of Watergate, where like Nixon's just trying to help people, but hippies are stopping him.
Wow. All right.
You know, Watergate was sort of a conspiracy to undermine the Nixon administration.
Oh, was it?
Nixon sincerely wanted to stop the Vietnam War and was a pretty good guy. And Chuck Colson especially was a good guy. He was such a nice guy. He just kind of got in over his head.
He got in over his head. That'll happen.
And now he's out of prison and preaching the Gospels. But it's this whole sort of fake version of Watergate drawn like an Archie comic book.
Right. Oh, my God. Al Hartley. Holy smokes. So... We're at an hour, Jason Van Glass, as will happen.
We didn't even get into that. It's fine.
We'll have you back. It's because the thing is for years I've known that this was a well that I could go to, the Jason Van Glass well.
And I'm happy to lend you some of these Christian comic books if you're considering converting.
I am already a Christian, and I don't tell anyone, mostly because everyone who does tell anyone then makes a comic book where they want to boss people. So I'm just going to let it go. But I have this to say, American public, internationals, those aren't words, whatever. Rangers of the Dork Forest, know in your heart that Jason Van Glass is a very talented comic, and you should go see him in Kansas City if you happen to be there, September 27th and 28th. You could follow him on Instagram and Twitter and all that, at Jason Van Glass. And if someone sends me $5 on Venmo
with their address, I will mail them a handmade zine of my comedy.
Oh, there you go. He's working on that zine. Remember that zine? That's going to happen. So Venmo
maybe someday I'll be like Tim
$5.
Leary, and you'll be glad you have one of the only copies.
Exactly. It'll be a starter copy of that very zine. So thank you so much for doing the show.
Thank you for having me.
And Rangers, you know the rules out there. Take care of each other.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat, my hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God. Why don't we just call that